welcome to another episode of the Poetry Channel's Talking with Poets, and delighted to have with me today Jeff Friedman, uh, and we're going to speak about his book Ashes in Paradise, which MadHat Press has published recently. Welcome, Jeff.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Thank you.
I'm a fan of your work too.
Thanks so much. No, it's a arresting title. Maybe we can begin. And let me show you the book, Ashes in Paradise. I don't know if that's.
Here, I'll send it back.
You'll throw it back to me. It has some very warm comments on the back from Denise Duhamel, whom I know actually from years ago. We used to read together in New York, and
Yeah, she's great.
and Robert, I don't know, so Robert
Robert
Scotellaro.
Scotellaro.
And Kim Chinky. I can refer to those later, but it's a handsome book. But let's begin with the title, Why Ashes in Paradise? And then perhaps you can also talk a bit about the poetic forms you use in this book. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think the thing is, I've always worked on, I hate to rhyme a little bit, but what was called midrashic poems, which are poems that retell biblical stories.
Okay.
And so there's a section of poems that sort of retell biblical stories. And I think to some extent, the idea of Ashes in Paradise is this idea of all that you attempt to kind of get back. By the time you get there, the whole idea of paradise and all the expectations and the expectations of our culture have been burned down, sort of like. So that was my feeling. It sort of informed the whole culture, that idea. That
So
what's left in trying and being aspirational.
Right. Or that we arrive in paradise in ashes. In other words,
Yeah.
we are
Yeah, that too. I feel a little bit like that myself.
Good. And tell us about the cover art a bit.
Oh, this is, Mark Vincennes, who's the editor of MadHat.
Right.
He's done 2 books of mine, and he's just done beautiful jobs on. Well, this was his idea entirely. I
Okay.
can't take any credit for it. He did a beautiful job on my Floating Tales book too. I have to say, wonderful designer. Also, there's a nice quotation by Ned Andrews on the front.
On the front, yeah. Friedman is one of the finest prose poets writing today. Perhaps we can take that as a takeoff point. Prose poetry. Now, what is prose poetry for you? What is lyric poetry? What is microfiction? Where are we when we read these histories, these stories in Ashes in Paradise?
Okay, so I'm going to read it. I brought in my own definition of a prose poem. Now, I don't know if I would stick by this on another day, but right now I'm going to stick by it. I'm going to read it. Okay. And I, used this a while ago. The prose poem is a chameleon. Just when I think I know what it is, it changes shapes and then changes shape again. It's a flicker of gold on the mirror of a river, 1,000 faces rising to the surface. It's a sentence looking for a paragraph inside a sentence. It's a paradox with wings flying into a luminous haze. So, I feel like the best way to define it was to try to stay away from defining it.
Right. Create a poem about it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I got, and I think that, I think to some extent that most of the pieces in this book can be looked at in 2 ways, as prose poems or as micros. And maybe Lydia Davis made a comment a while back that maybe we need another category to talk about these short pieces that people have been writing for quite a long time now. And so sometimes I feel like here's the prose poem, here's the micro story, and the flash story, and here's a little circle in between. And sometimes mine partakes of one, but it's in there somewhere. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's more poetry, more poem, and sometimes it's more micro. But they're all prose pieces in here. There's not one that's in lines. I used to write in lines all the time. But.
Okay. And your earlier Hanging Loose book is your earlier MadHat book is also a prose book of prose.
Yeah. I think that book was, it's greatly influenced by the idea of lightness that Italo Calvino has in his book of essays, 6 Memos for the Millennium. He has a wonderful essay called Lightness. And those are floating tales that I feel like they're humorous and they kind of, there's a political section of biblical, but they kind of float off the ground a little bit. You know, they're, what
Right.
if he has some, say he has one of his stories, he's got like a guy who wakes up to find out he's like a foot off the ground. So those tales are like 10 feet off the ground, sort of.
I'm going to put it in gallery so we'll be seeing each other. Okay, all right. Now let's Francis Ponge. When I think of a prose poem, I go back to Francis Ponge. Was he an influence on your writing as you?
Well, I like his work, and I particularly like the translation by C.K. Williams. But
Okay,
I think I would think of Zbigniew Herbert as being an influence. Kafka, huge. Um, I'm trying to think of who as I start to go through. It's extensive when I start thinking the biblical prose,
right. Okay,
big influence. And then I think people like if I want to go back, I guess I think of I love the Indian tales, that I was reading those. My Brenda Chari, a friend of mine who's an Indian novelist, she recommended those to me a while back, and I read that in the Panchantra. So those play a part in it. I would guess, Nin and Meg Pokris and Kathleen Magoo. A number of my friends, Lavinia Orlovsky, I feel like they come into, we have conversations so frequently that they play a part in the way, I think about things in work.
right.
And Szymborska, Wisław
Szymborska, right.
is huge. I love her work. There's so many, Istvan or Kenny, the Hungarian. I have some. My father's side's got Transylvanian and Hungarian roots, and or Kenny's a
Okay.
funny Hungarian writer.
Right.
The
Now,
book on
why do we hear one of your prose poems now, and just to the listeners, readers, to get a sense of what the book is about.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So this one's uh is a poem called, or is a piece called Lost Memory, and it was triggered by an argument I had with my sister, which is kind of interesting because the idea of memory and the
Oh,
change.
yes, I remember this piece. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, we're in a culture right now that's wiping out the Republicans and Trump, they're trying to distort reality. So the book has a lot to do with the distortion of reality and all this. But this is a more humorous take on it. My sister kind of remember, I had double pneumonia when I was growing up, and I was out of school for so long, told my sister that in recollection. And then she, months later, told me the story that she had double pneumonia when she was growing up. And I go, must have been before I was born because I don't remember it. But anyway, so I wrote a piece a little bit about the idea of importing a memory, of
Okay.
stealing a memory. So lost memory. My sister stole a memory of mine from my house and took it home, hidden in her coat. I couldn't remember the memory, but there was an empty space in the sideboard under the window. Give me back the memory, I said, standing outside her door, and I won't report you to the authorities. She let me in. Don't be ridiculous, she said. Why would I steal a memory of yours? Didn't take me long to find the memory, a blue jar sitting on the glass stand between two chairs. When I picked it up, she looked puzzled. This is my place, she said. These are my things. Not true, I replied, and unscrewed the lid. Emptiness wafted out with its stinging scent. Now I remembered something I had wanted to forget. I screwed the lid back on quickly and set it down. That's my memory, she said. You shouldn't have opened it. Then what do you remember? I asked. Nothing. It's gone because you let it out. And as I stood there angry at my sister, the scent of the memory evaporated, and all I could remember was the jar, and now that belonged to her. So
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece. Yeah. And universal, all of us have this experience, right? Of who owns the memory and uh, who has the right to the memory,
yeah, who tells the story?
who tells the story.
Yeah, so I still wanted to do it a humorous version, and this is one of those pieces that was both published as a prose poem and a micro. So,
Really, it was published as both. I mean,
well, it was in Best Microfiction. It was also in I think it was I forget, it was in Worldwide Writing or New World Writing, I think,
okay.
or Fortnightly Review, one of those two.
I think about Vasco Popa reading you. I don't know if you if you do at all. But
I like his work quite a bit, actually.
yeah, I mean
You know,
this Charles Simic translation, Homage to a Lame Wolf, which I
oh
read
yeah, that's
years
a great
ago.
book.
Yeah.
And I love Simic's The World Doesn't End. His book of prose poems is quite wonderful too.
Okay. Yeah. And now the fable. I mean, how would you call yourself a fabulist, a
Yeah.
surreal fabulist, a
Mhm.
surrealist, and a fabulist both? What? How would you?
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, I think
Yeah.
I've been reading like tons of I mean, Aesop's fables, but the Indian fables, the Panchatantra, of course, contains all those. And I mean, Fable Tale. I've been, reading so many of them over the years, like uh Augusto Monteroso's The Black Sheep and Other Fables, and tales where they run together, kind of like I've always been involved with surrealism, even when I was writing when I was writing lineated poems, they were surreal, influenced by a lot of the Latin American writers and Neruda and Lorca and Vallejo, and and it once and sort of like the prose poems and prose pieces opened up a door for me, I think, that allowed me to get all sorts of facets in. It allowed me to speak in a way I wasn't able to speak in the lineated poems, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, you answered the question I was about to ask, which is why did you abandon the delineated poem? And you just explained this in a way. But do you ever have a sense of nostalgia for the line? I mean,
Yeah, I think what happened is there was a period of time when I was annoyed about something that had happened, and I said I was going to write stories satirizing this group of people, and
okay,
then it started articulating itself. They started getting shorter and shorter and becoming more fable-like. But while I was doing that, I was like feeling guilty about not writing lineated poems. So I would try to write lineated poems one day and then go and try to write these fabulistic pieces the other day. And then I just had to give it up to go with it. And so as I did that over the last X number of years, I keep saying to myself, I have written a few poems and lines, but it's been really hard to come back to it. I'm not against, I mean, it's not like I'm never going to write a poem in lines again. I've written a few, but it's really kind of changed my I kind of feel like I'm wearing looser clothing or something. I don't know what it is.
or you've got religion somehow.
Yeah, yeah.
You've been converted into the.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like I am where I should be right now. It's been a
Yeah.
big change. I mean, my work has come to circle. I might get back there, or I might not. I might go into longer work. I don't know. But I mean, I'll see where it sort of where my work walks off into what space.
Right. Um, would you like to share another piece with us now?
Yeah, let me do a humor. I want to get down to some of the political ones, but let me do a kind of humorous piece that I
Right.
also did with this was originally performed with Curtis Folks, who played in Roy Nathanson's Jazz Passengers. He was considered one of the great trombonists in the world. He just recently died, and
Okay.
he did sort of there's a number where he's playing around this piece, which is called Spring and Air. And just to take you back to the beginning of the pandemic, remember everybody was
Right.
in the grocery store in masks and afraid of everybody else and what was going to happen. So this is kind of about that.
What page is it on, by the way?
It's page 7.
7. Oh, yeah. Spring it in. Okay. Thanks.
Spring in the air. In checkout lane 3 at the grocery, I feel my nose twitch inside my mask. The 2 carts closest to the cashier are 6 feet apart, but the rest of us are much closer together. While some choppers chat briefly, laughing at jokes, while some lean over their carts for support, and some pull out hand sanitizer, rubbing their hands briskly, I scrunch my face to hold back a sneeze. When the guy in the next lane asks me a question, I begin to answer, and without warning, the sneeze escapes. I'm shaken, but quickly hold up my hands and shout into my mask, "Allergies, I'm not sick." But the other shoppers look at me as if I'm dangerous. Before I can do anything about it, I sneeze again, and my mask sails off like a large butterfly, floating over heads until it lands on a grocery conveyor belt 2 lanes away, touching an avocado. Cashier removes the mask with her gloved hand. The shopper says no to the avocado, which the cashier places near a register. The other shoppers move as far away from me as they can. I try to reassure them, but a third, even more powerful sneeze explodes from my mouth and nose. The automatic doors open. The plexiglass windows shake. The shoppers hit the floor, holding their breath, their heads buried in their hands, a sea of droplets and aerosols hanging over them. There's no way for me to clear the air now. For a long moment, the store is silent. The only other person standing is the cashier in lane 5. She smiles and signals me to come ahead. But I'm not next in line, I say. You go, the other shoppers shout from the floor. So I wheel around them, pay for my groceries, and leave the store without another sneeze.
Mm. Yeah, you take on a very, I mean, the panic and fear of that time, and you take it
Yep.
with a very, I don't, I was going to say a light touch. Somehow you, like a feather, you sort of go through, you
Thank you.
graze over it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was sort of hard. I mean, it was like, weird because so many things were happening that were bad. And I just decided, well, let me write it. You know, I was trying to approach it, I guess, tell the truth, but tell it slant. So I was
Yes,
trying to
right,
approach
right.
it from saying my angles. Like I could write about it because it was such a bizarre experience. The co-op where I shopped at, they were trying to adhere to these rules, but they really weren't adhering very well. Everybody was sort of crammed together and afraid of each other too.
Um, Now, did this happen as you tell it here, or was
Well,
this?
it's a pretty much of a surreal story. I mean, my mask, I'm always, whenever I read this, my nose starts twitching all the time too,
Okay,
which is really
okay.
funny. But no, my mask didn't sail off and fly 5, and I didn't shake it much. I did sneeze a couple of times in the store, though.
Right, right, right. Yeah. And you call it so, I was going to say like Machiavelli or something, spring in the air. I mean, it's
Yeah,
a dark, a dark title, actually, ironic title. Uh,
exactly.
Spring in the step, a sneeze. Yeah, very good. Tell me about politics. I know you picked a couple sort of on political themes, but do you think that poetry makes something happen?
Well, Um, I think there'd be a lot of argument against that, but I have to say this: if it didn't make something happen, why is there so much reaction and rebellion and government action against poets? You know what I mean? Or attempts to silence them or to put them off to society. So there must be some way. Well, in our particular time and space, I mean, besides what happens in other countries, but in our particular time and space where poets are attempting to say something in a way that is real and truthful, whatever the way they have of expressing that truth. It may not be, because truth may need to have absurdism or may need to have exaggeration in already to reach others. But given what's gone on in terms of an attempt to distort reality entirely, what we saw happen before us on January 6th and before that, I mean, there are people in the country telling a whole different story. So anybody who actually even sits down and tries to get something right is making a kind of political statement, I believe, at this point. And
Right,
maybe at all points, but at this point, particularly with the background. And I feel like this book has been informed by both the pandemic and the incredibly cruel, brutal Trump administration.
right,
So,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
so much of that has made that. That's why I think it's much darker than. I mean, there are a lot of comic pieces, but it's a much darker book than Floating Tales, which was written earlier.
Mhm.
Um, you know,
Yeah. No, no, no. I think we're all affected so much by this darkening of, I mean, the blackening. What I don't know how to describe it. The sort of the riding roughshod over the best values that we have, right? You know, the
yeah.
democratic values that um, were trampled upon by that orange-haired tyrant. I mean, I wrote a book called 10,000 Steps Against the Tyrant, right? At the time, it was the tyrant was Trump, and
Yeah.
trying to think about what we were saving, and then, but then of course the truth is always much more messier, isn't it? And
Yeah,
and the savior has sullied himself, you know.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, historically he has. You know, I mean, if we go way back
Right,
I mean, yeah. I mean, we're in a really tough situation right now because we have the. I mean, you know, it's sort of like we don't want to see. I definitely don't want to see Trump get back in
right,
office.
right,
On the other
right,
hand, I'm not entirely. You know, I feel like Biden should have stepped down after the first term. It's not that he hasn't done some good things, but
right.
you know, his sins are begin from the past, like Clarence Thomas and some of the other things that have happened have come back to haunt him. And then what's gone on with Israel? Well, I mean, you know, come on with Gaza situation. You know, you can't be selling arms on one side and pretend to be sympathetic. On you just got to say, I'm not going to sell you arms to bomb. You
Right,
know,
right,
it's
right,
very
right.
complicated because I know that you know the Jews being attacked was not a great situation either. But there's got to be some. You know, look, you can't displace a whole population. You just can't.
Right, right, right. So why don't you read a couple of the quote unquote political pieces?
So
I
I
mean,
don't.
it's not for us to define. I mean, I think politics is everywhere
Yeah.
in
No,
the
that I mean, I think it just informs the way. I mean,
right,
I call it that, but I think the whole book is that way. I mean, I think the comic pieces are too,
right,
but
right.
it's, I don't sit down and go, I'm writing a political film today. That has never happened for me, but I do think because we live in a certain way, that that's what informs us. So we have that material in a way because that's what's happening in front of us, you know. So we're addressing it all in different ways. That's
And I can't help but think that you were you thinking of Dante as well in the title. I mean, Infierno and Paraiso sort of conflated in
yeah. I mean, that's in there. And then the attempt to recapture paradise in so many different ways, and just like again the Jewish Bible as well, and also you know, and Dante, of course, the idea, you know, like I said, paradise by the end, the third book is attempting. So that you know that's in there what paradise means in our society. So this piece is called "The Boy with Holes," and there is a theme of holes or an image of holes that runs through the book holes in people, holes in society, holes in the airs, black holes, and the lack of light. So that does
that's
run.
right. That's right.
Um,
Yeah.
so boy with holes. The officers who shot the boy repeatedly watched him fall face first, his arms and legs jerking until all movement ceased. They kept their distance, holstering their weapons, sure that it was all over. But the boy rose, his sweet face dirt stained. He walked slowly toward the officers. Light poked through the holes in his body. The ground was wet with blood. They stepped back and took out their weapons again. I've never seen anything like this before, one officer said. The other agreed. Though they told him to stop and get down on his knees, the boy kept walking until he stood so close he touched one officer on the arm. Like a breath grazing the skin, his hand felt weightless. The officer cocked his gun and held it to the boy's head. Crows gathered around them. The trees rustled. The red sun flared so intensely they had to squint to see his shape. And then the boy vanished. Now all they could see were the holes.
Guys, devastating piece. Yeah.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Really, it goes right into the heart muscle and keeps digging. Now all they could see were the holes. Yeah, the holes in our society, right? The holes in our system of justice and law and order. The
And the
holes.
holes in our thinking as well, you know, like
Yeah,
you know, so I mean, I don't, you know, it was such a, I mean, this has been going on in our culture for much longer than just what happened during the pandemic. It obviously goes all the way back to the beginning of the country, but it just blew up at a certain period. It blew up again. Let's put it that way. It's
right,
blown up
right.
again, but it blew up again. The lack of justice. I mean, the fact that all this could happen and then happen again and then happen again right in front of everybody.
That's right. That's right. Um, So you talk about, and I noticed that reading the holes throughout the book. So there's a piece, one of the pieces talks about a ghost as opposed to an angel, and the difference between the two. I don't know if you recall that particular poem or microfiction, short prose poem. But
Oh, Rain of
yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Whether uh, I guess we're all looking for a way out of the labyrinth, right? An answer to the to
yeah.
why to why are we killing ourselves? I mean, killing our planet, killing everything else that lives on it, and so how can poetry help get us the antidote? Um, or is poetry a kind of angel, or have we all already given up the ghost? In other words, we become holes.
An interesting. That's. I mean, I like the way you put those two together to think about the angel and the ghost. I mean, I think I was working. I've written a lot of. I've had angels in my work before, but they're usually the angels have been sullied to such an extent. And then what are the ghosts that come back? Like I've written about Dybbuk's and golems and monsters and ghosts, and the ghosts that come back that are sort of like they're like family members still talking to you. They're also like ghosts of other figures that are you're still in contact, like the society still is still in conversation with all the ghosts in the society, that they haven't stopped haunting us. And
Mm,
then there could be sort of the good side of the ghost where somebody telling you it's part of your consciousness in a way. So we're kind of haunted by all these ghosts. And I think the angels are any sort of concept of an angel, you know, is is like, what is that angel to us? Do they speak? They don't have body. And I kind of bring them down to earth all the time. And I guess I like bringing them down to earth. I like the idea, like that in Wim Wenders' film Wings of Desire, that the angel gives up his angelhood and comes down for love. So
right,
what I mean, it's like all these ideas about angels are going to save us. Well, they're not going to save us. They can't save themselves. So
right.
they might come to live with us, and they might come to live with us, and they might just be somebody you're related to, you know.
I visit an angel every day when on my morning walk in a the nearby woods. There is a cemetery, and I walk in the cemetery, and there's an angel on a stone, and I always consult that angel when I go by, or say hello to the stone angel. I mean, it's
Oh,
obviously.
really? Where do you live?
I'm in Rockville, Maryland. So near me, there are a lot of woods and the Rock Creek Park, which goes into Washington. I mean, 11 miles you could go on trails and walk into Washington, crossing streets and so on as well. But
Right, right.
yeah, there's a lot of greenery here. And but near me, there is a cemetery where there is a Korean section, a Chinese section, there's a Jewish section. I mean, I don't know that it's a multicultural cemetery, but
Right.
there are
Well, it's pretty
divisions,
equality.
equality. That's right. And anyway, so and the Catholics too, and of course the angel on this particular tombstone. Um,
Yeah,
it just happens to. I mean, I grew up in a culture. I mean, in a family with angels, and and I grew up in a country where civil war and sadly, and the sort of trampling of human rights and all these things were a part of my uh, psyche, are a part of my psyche. So, which is why the current situation in
so,
Gaza is particularly, I don't know, it just brings up a lot of stuff.
yeah, I
But
bet.
going, but yeah, again, I find this method of writing this allegorical method of yours, this
Yeah,
fabulous, perhaps the solution or a solution to that dilemma, because maybe you can tell truth through these stories in a way that might lead to illumination,
right.
Whereas if you just uh, s- write it out straight as a news report or something, it doesn't have that, it doesn't capture the imagination in the way that you do
Oh,
in these pieces. So go
thank
ahead.
you.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
didn't.
well, I think that that's to some extent, what I mean, if you go with what poetry, like Frost said, something like, okay, it comes from Horace originally. I think poetry begins in delight and ends in wisdom. I mean, if you sort of begin to think about like um, that um, that any sort of poetry or fiction, like it first has to entertain, meaning not necessarily entertaining, but compel you in some way, and then educate you or do something. I mean, there's got to be something to it, or why read it
Right,
or
right,
listen to it? And but you're not going to get if you're not going to get anybody involved with anything if you just start out preaching at them like in some way. I mean, so
right,
you
right, right,
have to
right.
find a way. I mean, it's sort of like when you're listening. I think when you're listening, like it's like watching like MSNBC or any of those stations. You know what they're going to say after a while, so they're going to keep hitting you with this stuff, and after a while, you just can't listen to them anymore. You know what I mean?
Right,
You're
right.
Fox is going to obviously tell it's like lies or whatever. It's going to shield you. But MSNBC is also going to repeat the same story over and over again. So you hear it, but what's the way it's going to really reach you? So, like, how is it going to get inside the body of somebody else? How's it going to get to it? And I think to some way, indirection, um, through indirection, I will find the truth of the king. Like Hamlet says that. I think so. Through indirection, we may be able to find truth.
Right, right. That's a great quote there from Hamlet. Through indirection, you get the truth to the king. Yeah,
But
yeah,
I forget exactly how it
yeah,
started,
yeah.
but through indirection, I will find the something. I have to find the exact quote, but it's something to
Right,
do with direction. I haven't read
right,
that but I just remember that. But there is that sense of indirection helping, and I like what can happen in one of these pieces. Like you
right.
can make the world sort of, I mean, there's a little sci-fi quality, I suppose, where you can make a world and tell a story and also have a lyricism to it and kind of like, and it can run, it's sort of more, it's like that Coleridgean, kind of like, take something supernatural, but bring it or take something out of this that's kind of romantic in concept, but bring it into the normal so that
Mm.
it's home. Um,
Did
I
you
think,
want to read by any chance Dirty Angel on page 44? Just because
oh,
we were talking about angels and
yeah, sure.
ghosts and
I'm
so
glad you
on.
took it.
Yeah.
Um, it's only 3 pages away from orgasms on, and
Yeah, we can't not read that one. I think you have to. I hope you don't mind, though there is censorship on American television. I don't know if YouTube.
all right. Well, I'll do Dirty Angel. If you want me to do the other one, I'd be happy to.
You
Dirty
could do the other
Angel.
one too, sure.
Okay.
All right.
I'm your angel, he said, his face and body covered with dust. He stood in my doorway and handed me a leaflet. The ink was smeared and the writing illegible. I crumpled it and gave it back, stuffing it in his shirt pocket. I'm here to help you, he said. Do you have a photo ID and something that might prove you're an angel? I asked. Look at my wings, he responded and did a full turn. He had two frail leaf like structures attached to his shoulders, filthy with ash and soot. I wouldn't call those wings, more like giant eyelashes or a mesh for catching bugs, I said. He put his hand on my arm. Let me enter, brother. Still, I wouldn't let him pass. Why do I need an angel? I asked. The angel laughed. That should be obvious. I peered into his dark, almost opaque eyes to see if I could see his soul. For an angel, his face and body were surprisingly solid. A pale light emanated from his dusty skin. Do something to prove you're an angel, I said. Pass through a wall or raise a chair off the floor with your mind or vanish into thin air. He shook his head. So much misinformation, he said. That's what ghosts do, not angels. Are you going to let me enter? I could see he wasn't going away anytime soon. So I stepped aside and let him in.
Mm. I'm really falling in love with your pieces. Yeah, well done, well done.
Thank you very much. That's
Yeah,
really nice to hear.
it's good to hear them, of course, out loud, and which brings you back to the magic of the first time. you hear stories, right?
Right.
As a boy or a girl, a little child, and the wonder of it. And I think that's what you give us. You give us that wonder and more in these pieces. I mean, now some are favorite, some are less favorite. I mean, you can't
Yeah, sure.
expect to have 100% strike rate, but I think you have. I mean, I wouldn't know which way you don't. I'm just joking, but I mean, I wonder every day whether I've written my worst poem or my my least best poem. I don't know.
Well,
Anyway,
yeah, you go up and down, don't you? Like
they go
as soon
up.
as I finish something, I go, "This is going to last as long as the language," and then the next day, I'm like, "Oh my God, this is awful."
You know, Jeff, uh, that old adage about less is more, I want to sort of bring it up because this has really been lovely. But why don't we finish with you reading two or three more of these lovely, wonderful, wondrous, luminous, angelic stories. Angelic with the dirty angelic stories. I mean, maybe starting with that
Or
Amazon, um, where you can buy
yeah,
orgasms.
okay, all right, I'll be happy to read. That'd be fun to read that one. Um,
And
or
also, if you, before we'll do that, and then we can sort of ask about what your current projects are and
okay,
what you're looking towards next. Okay, go ahead.
and this will just read this. This is kind of a fun one because I was thinking
Yeah.
about all the returns I've had on Amazon.
Right.
Uh, orgasms on Amazon Prime. We ordered 24 pairs of orgasms from Amazon Prime, 20% off per dozen. A box arrived 2 days later. Inside the box, the orgasms were packaged in pretty blue tinted plastic tubes, each with a cap and a ribbon. The fine print said, "Open only when ready to use. Each container good for 2 orgasms. Recycle after use." What if I want multiple orgasms? Natalie asked. I guess I'll have to use mine then, or we'll have to open 2 tubes. But it would be better to conserve our orgasms for really special moments. Tall and lithe limbed with lovely breasts, Natalie picked up a tube and held it to the light. I don't see anything inside the tube, she said. I took it from her and scrutinized it near the window with the morning sun coming in. I couldn't see anything either. I'll call Amazon, I said. The customer service person explained that the orgasms were colorless, odorless, like gas until the bottle is opened. And then it's like the 4th of July or nightclub with techno music blasting and strobes flashing. Wow, I responded. Couldn't wait to try, even though Natalie was skeptical because she only listened to hip hop and soul. In bed, we locked bodies and began kissing each other passionately. Then I removed the cap. Rolling on top of me, she held her position, her breasts hanging just out of reach of my lips. Do you feel anything? I asked. I think I feel a tingling, more like an itch, she said. It was a little bit like holding up your hand to an air conditioner to see if it's blowing cold air. 5 more minutes, nothing. I called Amazon again. It's like a broth, the rep explained. You have to shake it up real good so everything mixes. So I shook and shook it until the tube trembled and bubbles collided against its walls. The cork blew off and hit the ceiling with a tremendous force, foam running over the sides of the glass. What just happened? Natalie asked. Maybe the orgasmed, I answered, without us. As we lay in the bed, the air felt sticky and warm, and small bubbles floated above us until they popped.
A delight.
Thank you. I always like the idea that the orgasms might have an orgasm
Right, right. I think that's
without them.
just in time for our masked lives and
Yeah. Do you want me to do you want me to talk about it?
But
Or you read one more?
why don't you read one more or two more as you wish, and then and I'd like to ask you to. I mean, there's no end. I mean, this will just be a
Okay.
conversation. Will continue another day with another book, but
Okay. Well, so I'll
talk about
read.
your
I'll finish
project.
with a poem about truth. We were talking about the truth, and so
Right.
this one's called "The Last Truth."
Okay.
One truth was shot while it sat in a cafe, sipping an Americano and writing its memoir. Another truth rose up on a stage and protested the swarm of lies that had descended on the town, clinging to heads and faces or flying down throats. The mob rushed the stage, pummeling this truth until it fell beneath them. They kicked and stomped it to death. Another truth was tortured until it confessed it was a lie, and then the spirit left its body. Only emptiness resided inside it. Many truths were burned in the public square as they screamed, "I'm telling the truth." We collected their ashes and bone in an urn, tried to bring them back to life with spells and chants, but our words had lost their belief in the power to summon. And the last truth, hiding for months in an abandoned building, escaped into the forest. When it returned years later, no one recognized it or believed what it was saying.
Yeah, another really really strong piece. I think, of course, everyone who is familiar with the Greeks will think of Cassandra, and then will think of, and I think of modern disasters like Chernobyl, and the creatures sort of, or people coming back, trying to understand what happened here.
Yeah.
Well, not only Chernobyl, so many, but it's a beautiful piece. And the cafe, of course, brings you to, uh, I mean, that very dramatic beginning. One truth was shot while it sat in a cafe. I mean, a sort of an assassination. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the fact that we've had, what do we have? Something like 600 mass shootings last year, or over 600 mass shootings. And, just an amazing gun culture that we can't do anything about that.
Right, right. So what are you working on these days?
Well, I have a chapbook coming out in August or September with Bamboo Dart Press, which is run by Mark Givens. He runs Pelicanesis, and he had published the book, the collaborative book that Meg Pokris and I did together, called The House of Grana Padano, which is really kind of a fun book. We met each other in the first part of around the March, or we read together during the beginning of the pandemic online, and then we became fast friends and we started Zooming, and then we did a book together. So we're still writing, and now we're into our second book together. And we write together regularly, and I've become really good friends with her. It's one of those pandemic stories, how, so, I hadn't met her. She came to visit for a while. Otherwise, I hadn't actually met her in person for 3 or 4 years of talking to her, or 3 years of talking to her. I hadn't met her. She came and visited for a week, and now she's coming to stay in October. And so I'm working on a book with her, I'm working on another book with another friend of mine, Roy Nathanson, who's a great jazz musician, jazz composer. He was the head of the Jazz Passengers and played in the Lounge Lizards.
Oh
And
yes, launches it. Yes.
and he's also a really wonderful poet. And we're working on a book together too. So these collaborations have been quite wonderful because they're creative, but also they've kind of kept me going during the pandemic and during all the isolation. And also it's been really quite fun writing with other people and going back and forth. And then I think after I'm going to take some pieces from this chapbook and put them into a larger book that I've been working on, and see how that goes. I haven't put it together yet, but I know that I've written a lot of pieces that could fit around them, because to do the chapbook, which is called Broken Signals, I eliminated a lot of pieces. So I'm going to start moving some of them back in and seeing what I can.
When you collaborate with tell me her name again, the
Meg Pokris.
Meg Pokris. When you collaborate with Meg, what happens? Like you write a draft and she writes a draft and you add.
Well,
She
we've
writes
done a
a.
lot of we've done it in a lot of ways. Our methods develop, but really we've done a lot of the exquisite core where we've gotten closer and closer. There was where we write a lot. Well, I'll write a line, she writes a line, I write a line,
Okay.
or I write 2 lines, she writes 2 lines, and then sometimes she's given me a beginning and I finished it. Sometimes we started actually working off she liked a piece or two of mine in Floating Tales, so she wrote her version, and I wrote my version of her version of my version, and then she wrote her, and then but now we kind of just get together on Zoom and we start writing together. You know what I mean? It's kind of an unusual. We're so close that way that we
Right,
actually
right, right.
do it right there on the spur of the moment in the Google Doc. Now, Roy and I do a whole different thing. Like he writes, we kind of like work off, we kind of dress each other. And like that's a typical way, more typical way. He'll write something and I'll see if I can write something directly uh, taking some theme out of what he's doing. And then he'll write something that
Okay.
we have more separate pieces, I guess.
Well, I look forward to the fruits of these collaborations, and your readers everywhere will eagerly await them,
Yeah.
and your bigger project too. So very good. I mean, I love collaboration, but what I've done it is with musicians, where I've written lyrics and
Yeah.
set to music and so on. But and more performed with them, but at different points in my
Do
life. But
you play an instrument?
well, I've recently picked up a friend of mine lent me her the same instrument that Allen Ginsberg used to play. The uh, I always miscalled it a harmonium, but it's not a harmonium. It's a now I'm having a blank on the name, but it's an organ-like instrument that
Yeah.
I've just started to experiment with. But and I used to sing and write and sort of. When I worked with Haitian musicians in Haiti, we recorded an album called Rencontre Doute, which um, my latest book actually is, which is published by MadHat, is a book in Haitian Creole translated into English by myself. So it's a bilingual Creole English book called
Oh,
Poet Nanpoa, Poet of the Port. And some of those poems were set to music and recorded in this album, Run Conduit. So yeah, that's that. I mean, I love collaborating, and I love going back to Pound. The where you have dance and music and the word. I mean, if you can bring all
right.
these things together, somehow you're
Yeah.
recreating the.
So I think I've done, I have took up the guitar and I'm one of the worst guitar players. I have to say I've gone from miserable to being terrible over the years.
Here's the book, by the way, that I did
Oh, beautiful.
with
Mark, did Mark,
with
Mark,
Mark. Yeah,
did
yeah.
he design the cover too? He did another great
No,
job.
no, in this case, my son actually designed it,
Oh,
but he also had a role to play, Mark, in it. Uh, but the painting this was based on is by Frank Etienne, great Haitian, multi-talented artist, painter, poet, novelist, many things. And anyway, so poet Nanpoa, poet of the port.
well, I will be getting that book right away.
Oh, but yeah. Anyway, it's a thrill to collaborate. Actually, we collaborate in our sense, even writing our own poems, because you often share work, right? And people
Yeah,
give you opinions, and so it's a social act, even though it's a solitary act. Often writing, isn't it? I mean, it becomes
yeah.
social at some point.
I think I kind of like to think of my pieces as like in a way because I think back at the beginnings of civilization, besides the fact, that they probably were people were storytellers and they probably got up and did something for like with short pieces. They were probably
Right,
pretty short. Like, come on, when you're
right,
being chased by big animals and you're in
right,
a
right, right,
cave, you probably didn't have much time. Let me just get this one read to you real quickly, and then we can
right.
run.
Then
You
we
know,
can run, right? Well, let's hope we don't have to run in the country after November
yeah, let's hope so.
5. Thank
Anyway,
you.
go ahead. What are you going to say?
No, no, I was just going to say thank you so much, Jeff, for this lovely conversation one morning, one summer morning, early summer morning in 2024. But the book's
Yeah.
eternal, Ashes in Paradise. Here it is again. Um, please look for it at MadHat Press
Thank
or
you so much for having me. I really
yeah.
appreciate it. And talking to you has been really pleasure.
No, no, pleasure is mine. Thank you. And let's keep in good, close touch, all right? And
Oh, let's keep in
yeah,
touch. I'd love to
all right.
stay in
All right.
touch.
So
Thank you.
I'll close the the recording.